Welcome to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein, talking about the evolutionary, the revolutionary, the inspiration and the perspiration, and those aha moments that change everything. And now here's your host, Rich Goldstein.
Rich Goldstein here, host of the Innovations and Breakthroughs podcast, where I feature top leaders and the path they took to create change. Past guests include Joe Polish, Roland Frazier, and Mitch Thrower. This episode is brought to you by my company, Goldstein Patent Law, where we help you to protect your ideas and products. We've advised and obtained patents for thousands of companies over the past 26 years. So if you're a company that has software, product, or design you want protected, go to goldsteinpatentlaw.com, where there are amazing free resources for learning about the patent process. And you could email my team at welcome@goldsteinpc.com to explore if it's a match to work together. You could also check out the book I wrote for the American Bar Association that explains in plain English how patents work. It's called the ABA Consumer Guide to Obtaining a Patent. I have with me here today Ben Leonard. Ben is the founder of his company, Beast Gear, which is a fitness company that he started on his laptop in his spare time. He grew to an international seven-figure business, and he successfully exited after 3 years. In fact, he sold it to Thrasio, and it was one of their first acquisitions. He now helps others to do the same with their own brands, with his e-commerce consultancy and with his e-commerce brokerage. I'm pleased to welcome here today Ben Leonard. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Rich. Really, really good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, let's talk about where you got started. I mean, we were talking a little bit a moment ago about your background. I was a little surprised to hear that you are from Scotland, and yet I did not detect an accent. We were talking about our common friend Kian, who is from Scotland, who has a very discernible Scottish accent. I was tempted there to try and
Scottish
accent.
So
better off leaving that alone. But yeah, so tell me about your background.
Sure. I mean, I don't know Kian personally. So Kian, if you're listening, hit me up. We should catch up. I'm from just up the road in Aberdeen. So yeah, I'm in Aberdeen, although I was originally born in England, so my accent doesn't give it away. And we were saying before, I had no background in business before I started. I was a fully qualified whale and dolphin nerd. My background is actually ecology. And I stumbled into e-commerce in 2016. I got really ill, and I had a heart condition, and it had occurred for the third time. And I'm absolutely fine now. But this heart condition occurred, and I had to take a cocktail of drugs and not do very much for about 9 months. So that meant I had to give up my active hobbies, my fitness hobbies. So I did a lot of CrossFit, boxing, running, throwing weights around, scuba diving. And I needed something to do. Now, my then girlfriend, now wife, was very busy studying. And she said, why don't you do that idea you had for a fitness brand? A few years previously, I'd been training, I think it was at CrossFit. And the end of the session, somebody said, oh yeah, we beasted it today. And I remember kind of thinking, we beasted it, Beast Gear. That would be a cool name for a fitness brand. And then I kind of forgot all about it until I got ill. I was cleaning out my gym bag and looking at all the stuff I couldn't use and feeling pretty sad. And I thought, well, I could probably do a better job of that. So I started it really as a hobby to keep me in touch with my fitness hobbies without actually doing it. Maybe earn a bit of extra pocket money. And as you said in the intro, kind of grew arms and legs. And 3.5 years later, I'd grown it to mid seven figures, and I sold.
Wow. Excellent. I mean, that is, the holy grail, right? Is to take a business, grow it, and then exit. And that's amazing. And so, but along the way though, you did, have an IP issue come up.
I did,
I mean, it sounds like, first of all, I'll tell part of the story. Sure. And then we could continue and you can tell more. But it sounds like you had a, you got a registered design, in the UK.
That's right.
And essentially like the laws are different in different countries about protecting, IP, protecting designs. there are design patents in the U.S. There are things called registered designs in the U.K. Different procedures and kind of different criteria for them. But there's just one little lesson I want to highlight here, which is that so Ben got his design protection, and at some later point, someone said, like, hey, you're infringing my design. You're infringing my design patent. So there's just a few little like learning points there that I want to point out to the audience. One is that people often think that getting a patent means that you cannot be infringing other people's patents. It is absolutely possible for you to infringe another patent, even though you were granted a patent. And people often wonder how that could be. It's like, well, if I'm different enough to get my own patent, doesn't that mean I'm different enough that I'm not infringing? And it just doesn't work by the same principles. It gets kind of complicated, but so that's one thing to keep in mind, is you always have to have your attention on whether you're infringing. In Ben's case, he really wasn't infringing. But that might be the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people, is like, wait, you got your patent. What do you mean someone's saying that you're infringing? How could they do that? It is possible to be infringing someone else's patent, even if you get your own design patent or design protection. Again, not in this case, but I just wanted to highlight that point. So essentially, Ben, you're going along with your product. You're doing really well. And then suddenly a competitor gets in touch with you. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So this was product 3, 4, maybe 5 of the range. And I grew it to quite a few products in the end, but the brand was going quite nicely. I'd had this idea for a product which performed the same function as something that already existed, but was not going to be the same design. It was not going to look exactly the same. And I presented my ideas to a professional product designer who made the drawings. We had a mold made. We created the prototypes. I liked it. Off we went. At the same time, I'd already had my trademarks done by a reputable intellectual property attorney. So I approached them, and they put me to their patents and design registration specialist. And we protected the design across the UK, Europe, and Australia at the time. And my product really began to take off, both on my own website and on Amazon in the UK and across Europe. So much so that the most popular product of this type, which performed this function, was previously selling for probably £50, and I'd put I'd listed my product for a much more sensible price. I was still making a very fair margin of more like £20-25, and they had to drastically drop their price to try and keep up with me, and we were becoming the leader in this space. And so it was really quite a shock to me when I received the first indication that I knew something was wrong was when Amazon suspended my product. Not my account, just the product, for an intellectual property violation. And first of all, this happened in the UK, and then it happened in Germany. And the first thing I did, this was before I'd received any letters or anything, but the first thing I did was I simply went into Amazon, responded to the case with a copy of my design registration, and immediately my product was reinstated. And the interesting thing about that is that relates to the point you made a few minutes ago, which is just because you have a design registration or a patent doesn't mean you're not infringing on somebody else's. And so it's clear to me that the people in Amazon's intellectual property department didn't know the first thing about intellectual property, because I may well have still been infringing on their intellectual property just because I had my own registration. Right. But they clearly didn't know that, so they thought that was fine. They reinstated me. Next day, I was down again because their lawyers had written to them and explained that no, I'm still Ben's still infringing. So finally, a couple of days later, the letters arrive in German. Because I was selling this product in Germany, the very large owner of this brand knew who I was. They'd done their homework. They knew I was a one-person operation. they wanted to threaten and bully me out of business. It was very obvious from their approach that they had experience in doing this. So they wrote all their letters in German through a German attorney to make it as difficult as possible for me. They knew I was selling in the UK mostly, but they thought, well, since he's selling in Germany,
they also did their homework, and they knew that you failed German in high school.
Absolutely, yeah. I have absolutely.
So like, we did our homework. We're gonna make it as hard as possible for him. Now, just teasing, of course.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much what happened. So,
right,
you can imagine you're one person business. You're doing this, as a hobby part time, and it's worrying, right? So this letter arrives in the mail. First thing I do is speak to my attorney, my intellectual property attorney, and she says, you may be in trouble here, but we're going to do our research. So after quite a long time, few weeks to be honest, of trying to first of all figure out whether I really was infringing on their design registration, and so all this time my product is suspended on Amazon, right? I'm not making any money off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty worried. We're trying to first of all find out whether there was any indication that their product or anything like their product was in the public domain before they registered their registered design or even their US patent. And we didn't come up with much luck there. But what we realized was that actually my product wasn't, after all, infringing on their design registration or their US patent, not that I was selling in the US. And this was a case with this particular product, right? This product had been this competitor product had been designed by, an entrepreneur not dissimilar from me in the US. And further down the line, he'd sold his business to a large organization. And so this large organization had inherited the original patents and design registrations,
right,
which were fairly poorly put together drawings.
Yep.
And to the very, very trained eye of my design attorney or my intellectual property attorney, we discovered that, first of all, I wasn't infringing on their patent, which we my product just doesn't look anything like theirs, but they were just upset that I designed a better product and they were upset about it, basically. Mm-hmm. And my product was becoming the market leader.
Yeah. And so just to give a little synopsis of kind of like what you've been describing, what's been going on here, my own encapsulation of it. So essentially, like, you're shut down, and as time goes by, it's like you're losing sales. Like every single day, the product's not selling, you're losing sales. But what his attorney was doing is they were doing their homework on the patent that he's being accused on. And so they're looking at two aspects of it. They're looking at whether infringement is really present, and they're also looking at issues regarding validity, like whether the patent itself is valid. And so anytime that someone is questioning whether you're infringing a patent, like, those are the things to do. Like, a lot of times, like Amazon sellers want to do is they want to shoot from the hip. Sometimes they'll hire like a firm that's used to dealing with IP with complaints of all kinds, like about listings. And so, like, there are people that they just launch right into letter writing mode, and they'll just write a letter to, we get accounts restored, and we get people back on, like, for all kinds of issues and allegations of fraud and what have you. That's their specialty. But what Ben did, which really set him apart in this, and what his attorneys did. First of all, he valued what the attorneys were about to do. And what the attorneys did is they realized that these cases are won through homework. Yep. These cases are won by digging to find out the truth of whether you're really infringing, and get underneath the patent itself, because often there are issues about whether that patent should have even been granted. So, just a little aside here on that is that I don't typically get involved in these types of disputes, but the ones that I have, I've won every single one of them, because it was all about just digging in and doing the homework and finding those issues, and then making it black and white. Because for Amazon, for example, like for reinstatement, they don't want to deal with shades of gray. They don't want to hear arguments about like, well, mine is a little bit more curved, or there's a little bit different about the shape of the handle, right? They just want something that's just completely clear. Like you can't possibly dispute that. Absolutely. Like there's no way you could be infringing. So what Ben's lawyers did is they dug into the history of the patent and they found clear issues. They found clear issues with why it was likely invalid or at least possibly invalid. And then they found the reasons why he would not be infringing. And that's critical to how these cases are won. So then, Ben, continue.
Sure. I'm glad you put that in there because, first of all, when it comes to intellectual property, despite having been through this experience, of course, I am still very much a layperson, and it's great to hear it translated into like what does that actually mean. Yeah. And I'm really glad you mentioned about the kind of the firms who just they go straight for the jugular with writing letters. My intellectual property attorney had practically no experience of dealing with Amazon. That didn't matter. What they were was fantastic attorneys who knew what they were doing and knew that we had to be patient, take our time, get it right. Because it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with Amazon or whoever, you got to get it right. So we discovered that A, I was not infringing on their design registration, but B, because the quality of their design registration was actually very poor, the design registration did not actually tally with the product they were selling. In other words, their own design registration and indeed their US patent, which they'd been relying on for 2 decades, didn't actually protect the product they were selling. So after some back and forth, in a mixture of English and German, all of which, by the way, was being relayed back to their client, who was not German, was actually in North America. We were able to say, look, first of all, Ben's product is not infringing on your design registration. And second of all, your design registration doesn't actually protect the product you're selling. So unless you would like us to actually take this further and have your design registration invalidated, we suggest you, A, leave Ben alone, B, pay his legal fees, and C, reimburse him for the revenue lost from his product being suspended on Amazon. And that worked in so far as they left me alone, and my product went on to become the leader. Unfortunately, I didn't get my legal fees back, and I didn't recover any of my lost costs. So I lost, tens of thousands of pounds. However, the fact of the matter is I won, and that felt really good because I was at that time I was running the business on a laptop in a cupboard in my apartment, and it felt like a David versus Goliath event.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. That's awesome. And again, just to encapsulate some of that too. So in the end, his response to their attorneys, there's a few things to highlight about that. Is like, number one is that it pointed out the fact that if he wanted to, he could have actually brought an action to clarify the fact that he's not infringing and that the patent is invalid, right? So people like think about this notion of a cease and desist letter as like something that they would throw around willy-nilly. I mean, it's like, hey, I can't afford to litigate, but I can afford $1,000 to hire an attorney to write a cease and desist letter for me. What they don't realize is that when you send that letter, the other side can turn around and sue you.
Yep.
They can sue you for what's called declaratory judgment. It varies by jurisdiction. I don't know what the law is in the UK, but it sounds similar in that like the person that you're threatening has a right to clarify whether you're really infringing or not, rather than have you just hold this threat over their head. Like if their business is going on and they're making product, they're about to order more products, they need to know that a year from now, you are not going to turn around and sue them for damages over all of the products they've sold over this past year. So that right to clarify the issue once you've been threatened through what's called a declaratory judgment action is a significant counter threat that you can be made. And it's also a reason why you have to consider carefully and word carefully if you're going to send the cease and desist letter. You don't want to just like look at that as like, well, I can only afford a letter, so I'll do that, because you might get roped into $100,000 or $1 million lawsuit if you send that letter. So that's one thing. Also to point out, Ben's attorney asked them for damages. And it's perfectly reasonable that if someone unfairly shuts down your listing, that they're liable to you for damages. The question is it worth spending the money to go after them and collect? I mean, we've actually successfully gotten people to pay damages when they realized that they made a big mistake by shutting us down without any justification. Like, it was so black and white that they were wrong, that we were able to get them to agree to pay significant damages to our client who was unfairly shut down. So at the very least, in this case, it was a reasonable thing for Ben's lawyers to do to ask for them to pay his fees. And they didn't know for sure whether he would take that action to bring that declaratory judgment action or go after them for damages. And then that's the chess game that happens in any of these litigation situations. And again, it's often not worth, it's not worth the money to have to bring an action to compel it. But it was a strong enough threat, all of that put together, that they went away with their tail between their legs, and he never heard from them again. So, there's some serious tactics in how this was handled. And I give his attorneys an A+ for what Ben's described that they did. And I think there's just a lot for everyone here to learn from. So it's an excellent story about IP and strategically using it and using lawyers at the right time to carry the day.
I was lucky because so I stumbled upon my IP lawyers initially because over here there's kind of like there's a thing called Scottish Enterprise, which is it's linked to the government, but it's not political, and it's an arm which helps small medium sized businesses, and they provide advice and guidance. It was them initially who pointed me in the direction of this intellectual property attorney, because this intellectual property attorney actually does free consulting at the local library for people starting up a business. And so the year I started up, they helped me. They gave me some advice about getting my trademarks done. Then when I had a bit of money, they actually did more trademarks for me. Then when I had a bit more money, they did my design registrations. So if I hadn't stumbled into that, I could have been in a lot more trouble than I ended up being in. And I think, the moral of the story there is, and a lot of people in e-commerce don't do this, is have a defensive IP strategy from the get-go. Like, before you do anything, get your trademarks and get your designs protected. I see it on the forums and the Facebook groups all the time. People say, I've just been quoted this much money to get my trademarks done. And in the UK, people will reply saying, well, just go to the intellectual property office and pay £200 and do it yourself. And I just cannot. I mean, I get bootstrapping your business. I'm a big fan of bootstrapping businesses. But for some things, just don't be silly. If you just get it done by a professional, please, because otherwise you're going to pay down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the interesting thing there too is what's important is the strategy. There are, it's like people have their attention on the wrong thing with that. It's like, I see companies, even venture-backed companies, going and like saying, okay, we've got these 10 patents to file. And then they find a firm that gives them what they think is a fair deal to file those 10 patents. And, in software space, they could be spending a couple of $100,000 on those patents. But what they don't look at is, should they be filing these 10? And when I look at it, sometimes I'll say, yeah, you filed the wrong 10. There was actually 3 that you should have filed. And those 3 do not overlap with the 10 that you actually did. So in essence, you wasted a few $100,000 on patents because you went for like Yeah, like we need, like you already thought you knew what you needed. And
Yes.
to me, it's like the IP strategy is the biggest piece. And for me, like I see that as the most important thing that I do. Like, I think that, I mean, personally, that I'm in like the 90 something, 95th percentile in terms of ability to actually write a patent application. But that aside, that's not even it. That's not even the reason why I feel it's important for people to work with me. It's like, it's the strategy in the beginning. Like, it's just steering the ship. Like, even if I didn't do the patents, it's like just knowing the right thing to do to protect yourself at the right stage of your business. Like you know, that that's where I feel I earn my pay, and it's funny
Absolutely.
how many people overlook that.
Yeah. Or guess instead of just asking and paying for someone who knows, you know?
Right.
And then they don't have to worry about it. They know they're covered because an expert's sorted it out for them, and they can concentrate on what they're best at.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. And I think like that's the thing, is just like steering the ship and setting the strategy is like the most important thing in it. And like people put their attention on something like, like LegalZoom will file a patent application for a few $100s. Yeah, but it might not be the patent application that you need.
Yep.
And like just today, like there was a client who like they just had in mind, like, look, all I need is I need you to file this 3-class trademark application. And that's where their attention was on. But, when we looked at it, and when I went over with my colleague, Julian, we decided, like, you know what? This one class is never going to make it. It's going to sink your entire application. This other class, it's not ready to be filed because you don't have appropriate specimens. You're not using it in the right way that would satisfy the trademark office. And then this one is good to go. So let's split it. Let's file 2 applications on different basis. And then therefore the one class is not going to sync the whole application. The other one's not going to hold back the one that's ready to go from issuing. And then the one in the middle essentially can, like, we can do what we need to get that ready to be approved. So it's just like that, kind of like steering the ship, that like just a conversation between me and my colleague. Like we figured out that strategy, and it changed the entire course of what this person would have done with their trademark and how the next year would have unfolded for them in terms of their battle to get the trademark. So yeah, big advocate of strategy. I'm glad you see that. I mean, I'm just usually, it's like I'm preaching, like, here I know I'm preaching to the choir, but often when I'm talking about this stuff, it's like, yeah, of course you're a patent and trademark lawyer, so of course you'd say that. But like,
Yeah.
it's
No, I'm
it's
definitely the choir.
It's something I'm passionate about. I'm glad that you get it too.
Yeah, the number of times I talk to, whether it's just people I'm having a chat with on like a Facebook group, or whether it's mentees that I'm working with, and they're so I get it, because I was like that too. That they don't want to spend any more money than they have to,
right?
And they think, oh, can I do it myself, or can I do it cheaply, or do I really need this? It's like, well,
get a guy on Fiverr. Yeah, I got the Fiverr guy working on my patent.
My God,
can you imagine?
Fiverr. Can I go to Fiverr? Yeah. And it's not just about like in case you get sued, because on the balance of probabilities, you probably won't. But when it comes to trying to exit your business, somebody's only going to buy it when they do their due diligence if you've got all your ducks in a row. And
right.
If your intellectual property isn't right, well, nobody wants to take on that liability. So get that done straight off the bat.
Absolutely, 100%. And speaking of which, speaking of when it's time to sell, so a really awesome thing that I think we ought to highlight here too is that you sold your business to Thrasio, and this is just like a huge opportunity right now for brands. I mean, people have been launching brands on Amazon because they realize that they can have a nice business and profit from it. But something interesting that's been happening over the last few years is that there's been a ton of money being invested into acquiring these brands. Like, like there's institutional money, like, big universities have endowments, like billions of dollars to invest in whatever. And so e-commerce brands has attracted the interest of even institutional money. And so you've got a company like Thrasio, which kind of is, I think, the fastest company to $1 billion valuation in history. I've heard like they've raised, I don't want to get the numbers right, but it's approximately like I think they raised $1 billion to acquire other e-commerce brands. And I can't tell you how many people I know that have had their brands acquired in this way. And so it's like you can build a business and have it acquired. And, you were one of the first acquisitions, or the first acquisition of Thrasio. And so since then, you've been helping people to not only grow their own brands, but then also to broker to companies that would acquire them. So I guess let's talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I wasn't their first acquisition, but I was one of the first in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And when I sold, I made the decision to sell in early 2019, and the deal was done kind of late 2019. And I approached at this point, right? It's February 2019. I've decided to sell. I haven't heard of Thrasio. I haven't heard of any other aggregators in this space. And the idea of being able to sell an e-commerce business like this is relatively new. So I went to a broker, and I'm glad I did, because they introduced me to the buyer, who is, as you say, Thrasio, and I can say that because they use me in their PR, and they're good guys. But I went to a broker, and insofar as they introduced me to a buyer, that they did a good job. And they're good. They're good guys. A couple of things happened in the process of them doing what they do, and they didn't do a great deal more than just kind of that. Introduced me to the buyer, and I, on the other hand, did a great deal of work, and my accountant did a great deal of work to get the business ready to sell. And so after selling, we put our heads together and said, we could do a better job of this. So we created Ecom Brokers. And the difference with us is, well, first, we're in the UK, although we're operating globally, but we're in a nice little space here in the UK and Europe because there's no one else really doing this. And so what we kind of bring something different to the table, where most of the other brokers are really just kind of selling, shovels to the gold rush, and don't really have the lived experience of, putting your heart and soul and blood, sweat and tears into your e-commerce business and crying down the phone to sell a support at 3 a.m. And they don't have Alison, my co-founder's experience of 20 plus years in mergers and acquisitions, and her experience as an e-commerce specialist accountant. So we're able to work with businesses who they might want to sell now, but we'll work with them, particularly on the accounting side, but also on the e-commerce operations side, to really get them ready to sell and see them realize a much higher valuation than they otherwise would if they went direct to a buyer who's obviously going to offer them the lowest they possibly can, or went to kind of a normal broker who's really just kind of a middleman. Or we'll work with people who might want to sell further down the line, 6 months, a year, 2 years. And we'll kind of we'll rebuild them from the ground up, get them positioned perfectly in the right way. And I like to say we'll get them built to sell, with all the proper way of doing things, particularly from an accounting point of view. We'll properly calculate their sellers' discretionary earnings, properly do their add backs, get them a really good deal structure. And the most important one, I think, is finding them the right buyer. Because you mentioned before, there's so many people coming into the space to buy businesses. Unfortunately, a lot of them, they know a great deal about raising money, but they know diddly squat about running a business or running an e-commerce business. And so we make sure we find the right buyer, because so much for the seller in terms of their reimbursement for selling their business depends on the earnout. And so we don't want to be selling a brand to a buyer who is not the right buyer for that particular type of brand or product. So that's something that we do very carefully. So I started the brokerage, which links in very nicely to kind of my mentoring. Some of my mentees then go on to sell their business through that. And I just kind of love doing this. So, I love this e-commerce space. I'm still building brands in it myself. And the exit was obviously an extremely exciting time for my business, and I'm glad to help other people with that.
Exactly, and that's amazing, and so it sounds like from the experience that you had with your own exit, you kind of learned how to help brands to to not only grow their business, which you do with part of your business with your agency, but you also help them to position themselves better for exit and get things lined up to have an exit that was kind of like to have even a better experience than you had with your exit. And that's amazing. And another thing you had mentioned earlier, I want to throw in here. We're running out of time, but I wanted to throw in here too that you've been kind of building another brand of your own. And so essentially, I guess one of the things that you mentioned, which really resonated with me, is that it's kind of like you're keeping the saw sharp by you're working with other brands, but by working on your own brand at the same time, it's kind of constantly keeping you in the game to keep your tools sharp in terms of how to help them. And I think that's super cool as well. Yeah,
that's right. I can't very well consult with other people or mentor other people if I'm not, still in touch with this industry myself. So yeah, I'm still building new brands, partly because I love it and partly because I need to still have, skin in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to quickly highlight something too that you were mentioning when you're talking about some of the companies acquiring businesses don't really know how to run an e-commerce brand, and some do. And just here's an interesting point. There was a room on Clubhouse with some of the founders and main people at Thrasio a couple of weeks ago. And, they mentioned the fact that I think they said they have 5 IP attorneys on staff at Thrasio, which is incredible, which means it means 2 things. I mean, first of all, that means that they know how to run a brand and to handle those complaints and those issues internally rapidly. But also, it shows that in the due diligence in acquiring a brand, you need to have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, because a company that's serious about acquiring brands, they're spending a lot of energy and they have a lot of attention on the IP. And so it's just another reason to dot the I's and cross the T's.
Yep.
And just again, final point, in terms of you mentioning how important it is company acquiring knows how to run a brand. I mean, you said they've got a great team over there. They've got Casey Goss over there, who from Viral Launch. They're some of the people they have over there. It's kind of nuts. I'm a big fan of those guys, and I'm just happy to give them a shout out.
I had a call today with the Beast Gear's new brand manager, and they're awesome. And they've hired so many people now that they have. If you take the number of brands they've acquired and the number of staff they've got like 6 or 7 staff per brand. Yeah. So yes, they know. When I mentioned before, some of these guys don't know what they're doing. Yeah, Thrasio know what they're doing, right. But a lot of the copycats, they know how to raise money. Unfortunately, they don't know how to run an e-commerce business, and they're struggling to hire the talent, because all the talent knows that the best way to make money in this game is actually sell your own brand and not work for someone else.
Right. No, absolutely. This is awesome. And so if people want to learn more about you, get in touch with you, talk to you about helping them with their brands or with brokering a business, how do they go about getting in touch with you?
Sure. Well, I'm on all the main social networks. My handle is benleonard.pro, and you can get me on LinkedIn. My website for if you want consulting with your e-commerce business to help you scale it up. My website is benleonard.pro, Leonard. And if you want to talk about getting your brand ready to exit, whether it's now or down the line, go to ecombrokers.co.uk. It's a UK domain, but we operate globally.
Great. Yeah, fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thanks for having me, Rich. It's been really nice. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at innovationsandbreakthroughs.com, and we'll see you next time.